Welcome back to Benson and Harf. I'm Marie Harf. I'm here with Guy Benson. Polls have just closed in West Virginia. We will be following that primary tonight. A lot of political news there. But now we're turning back to the big foreign policy news of the day. President Trump announcing that he is pulling the United States out of the Iran nuclear deal. Joining us now, Senator Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware, a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, someone who is focused on these issues quite a bit in the Senate. Senator, thank you so much for joining us on what I know is a very busy night.
Thanks for a chance to be with you, Marie and Guy. It's great to have the opportunity to talk through where do we go from here on the Iran deal and on our security.
Exactly right. And that's, I think, where we should start. Where do we go from here? The president made very clear today that he does not like the Iran deal. He has said this many times, but he did not outline a detailed plan for moving forward, although he talked a little bit about what negotiations might look like. What is your response to the president's speech today? What are your thoughts moving forward?
Well, about half of the remarks the president made, I agree with. Like many Democrats, like many Republicans, I see Iran as a dangerous regime, a regime whose ballistic missile program, whose human rights record, whose support for terrorism makes it deserving of our attention, of our strong efforts to constrain them and to make sure that they are less able to spread their brand of terror in the region and the world. But what I disagreed with was his timing and his decision to leave the Iran deal. It was not a perfect deal. It only intended to deal with the nuclear weapons ambitions of Iran, not to deal with the other areas that the president and I find so concerning about Iran's ongoing behavior. The IAEA, the Nuclear Inspector Organization, and our allies all confirm that Iran has so far kept to the terms of the Iran deal. I would have strongly preferred if President Trump had chosen to build on those foundations, to address the key issues that he identifies and that I agree ought to be addressed about the ballistic missile program and the support for terrorism in the region and the future path post the Iran deal. And I think our three closest European allies were very intent on doing that with him. Now we're in a different place. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if Iran's going to resume enrichment. We don't know if President Trump and the administration will impose hard secondary sanctions on our European allies. And we don't know what impact this will have on his ability to negotiate a deal with North Korea.
Well, I'm really glad you brought up North Korea because the president brought it up today when announcing his Iran decision. And I know there's been a lot of criticism that some of our friends around the world will look at the decision today and say, how can you possibly try to negotiate another non-proliferation agreement when you just pulled out of one that many, many countries, including many of your allies, support? How do you think this will impact the upcoming talks with North Korea?
Well, I think one of the strongest parts of the Iran agreement was the inspections. We got searching, continuous inspections of all known nuclear sites, not just enrichment sites, but uranium mines and uranium mills and the places where centrifuges had been developed or tested. That is a complete nuclear fuel cycle testing and inspection regime. We have to have something comparable in North Korea to have any kind of a credible agreement. My concern is that Kim Jong-un and President Trump both have reasons to want to do a positive but superficial meeting, summit, and agreement. And a summit without a strategy and a summit without a strategy that we can enforce is a very risky thing. Exactly the same group, the International Atomic Energy Agency, that has led successfully the inspections of Iran so far, is the only group really capable of doing those inspections in North Korea. And if we've turned our back on the credibility, thoroughness, and respectability of their inspections in Iran, it raises a question about how would President Trump verify any commitment by Kim Jong-un to denuclearize. I'll remind you, we've been here twice before. Kim Jong-un's father and grandfather made public commitments, signed agreements that they would denuclearize, only to turn back from them. We can't trust the North Korean regime, just like we can't trust the Iranian regime, and we will need searching inspections to make any agreement work.
Senator, I share your skepticism on North Korea. I think it's very important that people on both sides of the aisle watch that situation with clear eyes, without rose-colored glasses, because of the history that you just laid out. You mentioned some of our administration officials who have been making arguments out there saying, well, folks like you are making the point, the folks in Europe aren't necessarily happy about this, some of our allies, but there are other allies who are. The Saudi government putting out statements earlier that they are supportive of the Trump administration's move here. Same, of course, with the Israelis, who had that major coup, the intelligence coup last week that the president cited today. Don't you think the allies of ours, who are enemies and adversaries of Iran in that region, who are most directly affected by it, have a point?
Well, I can see why the Netanyahu government and the Saudi government are encouraged by this. They are directly threatened by Iran, and they have been most vociferous publicly in their opposition to the deal. However, in private conversations, even leaders of those two countries have conceded that so far the Iran nuclear deal has succeeded in blunting their nuclear ambitions. I do think it was a huge coup by Mossad to extract and publish for the world the archives of the Iranian nuclear weapons program. I do think it confirms something that many of us believed for a long time, which was that Iran's protestations that its program was always peaceful were nothing but lies. And it reinforces that we have to be able to have accountability mechanisms in order to have an agreement with a regime like Iran in order for it to work. The alternative to a multilateral international agreement to constrain the ballistic missile and nuclear programs of North Korea and Iran is regime change. And in both cases, I will tell you, that is a prospect just too horrendous to contemplate. I don't want us hurtling towards another Iraq war where, based on a credible fear of WMDs, we go into a country in the Middle East where we don't have the scale, the firepower, or the staying power to genuinely make a difference. I think we need to be pursuing diplomacy, and I think our European allies are questioning now whether we are a reliable partner in making diplomatic measures that will drive Iran in a better direction.
Well, I think the administration would argue that we are still going to pursue diplomacy and pursue a stronger deal, this time with perhaps a more credible threat of military force if it didn't work out, which might cause the Iranians to make some concessions that they didn't feel like they had to with the previous administration. I guess my question is, and you acknowledged what the Israelis accomplished with that intelligence, that act where they were able to get the documents out of Tehran and present them to the world. Those proved that the prerequisite requirement to get even to the point of implementation for the rest of the deal, the Iranians had to come clean fully, and they didn't. The Israelis have now conclusively proven that. Doesn't that say something about Iran's faith and bad faith, good faith, their faithfulness to a broader commitment if they're lying and cheating from literally the very beginning?
Well, Guy, I've never had the illusion that the Iranian regime just needed a little sweet talk and invitations to parties, and they'd suddenly change their tune and rejoin the community of nations. I've always viewed them as a dangerous and an untrustworthy regime. I can't speak for whether that's the case of all of my colleagues or not, but I thought one of the things that was most commendable about the Iran deal was there were pieces of it that were confirmable, verifiable, and irreversible. For example, re-engineering the potential plutonium reactor by filling its calandria with concrete and thus blocking the most credible path that Iran had towards plutonium, which would have been an order of magnitude more dangerous than the uranium enrichment they were doing. That was a real accomplishment of the Iran nuclear deal. Getting their entire enriched uranium nuclear stockpile, with a small exception, shipped out of the country under international seal and supervision, that was an accomplishment. Getting the IAEA searching inspection capability in the country, that was an accomplishment. On the other hand, there were clear other issues in Iran's behavior that were not addressed by the deal. Right. To think of Iran as a country that was dealing in good faith at all moments, all along its trajectory as it developed a nuclear weapons program, would be profoundly naive. I never had that view. I hope that we can now find some path towards re-engaging our allies, renegotiating with Iran, and getting to a stronger deal. But I frankly think President Trump's decision today makes that less likely, not more likely.
I completely agree, Senator, and I know a lot of us are skeptical of where this diplomacy goes. But one final question for you. If, through some miracle, the Trump administration is able to either get a diplomatic agreement with North Korea or Iran and our allies, do you think they should bring it to Congress for approval?
I do think close consultation with Congress and congressional oversight and engagement is essential. I worked with Senator Corker to make sure that Congress had a role in the Iran deal. Frankly, one of the other things I'll point to in the North Korea negotiations, it's key that we get agreements that are irreversible and verifiable for changes in North Korea's ballistic missile and nuclear programs and its other WMD programs. North Korea is a very dangerous regime. So is the Iranian regime. My hope is that the president will keep Congress regularly updated and informed. But I'll remind you, the bipartisan sanctions bill that we passed last year by a margin of 98-2 called on President Trump to deliver a strategy for how to deal with Iran to Congress by January. He still hasn't developed or delivered it. We're still waiting for that consultation. I will simply say, in a positive vein, I am hopeful that with a new Secretary of State, we will have a new level of consultation, and I do hope that Congress will have the opportunity to weigh in on whatever agreement is reached with North Korea or with our allies with regards to Iran.
Absolutely, and we all hope we see that strategy on Iran in detail from the Trump administration as soon as possible, given the threat we know they pose. Senator Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware, member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, thank you so much for joining us tonight to discuss the big news out of the Trump administration today. Thank you.
Thanks, Marie. Thanks, Guy.
Sure thing. We really appreciate it.
We'll be right back with more Benson and Harf after this.
You can watch Guy and Marie or listen anywhere on BensonandHarf.com.